Morning, everyone. I'm just going to give it one more minute as I see people are still joining us. So just hold on and we'll get started. All right, well, I think we'll get started this morning. As a reminder, these are recorded, so if there are folks that are not on from your teams, certainly this will be posted on our website. So with that, good morning. My name is Bree Mackey. I'm the Executive Director at the Office of Broadband, and we are excited that you are here. And I am just going to provide some updates, some short updates, and then we'll turn it over to the team that will be presenting today. But again, we're excited and thankful to have these other state agencies here to join us as we bring this series to you. As a reminder, this is the third in this series, the April Navigating Plus series that we are having. And if you missed the other two, they are posted on our website. And both this week's and our final week next week will also be posted on our website. As we all know, broadband deployment is complicated, and we're really hopeful that these conversations can help navigate some of those complicated issues. We also appreciate all that you do to help us achieve our goals of providing reliable broadband services to Minnesota. So, if you are not aware, the Office of Broadband was created in law in 2013, with the Office of Broadband starting and having an official office in 2014. So that means this year we are celebrating our 10th anniversary, and we did do a celebration event in early March. Hopefully some of you were able to participate in that, but just again, all of this is possible because of the partnerships we have with all of you. Some other updates is our team continues to grow, and so I know you work very closely with a lot of the team members on our team, and many of them are joining today, but just really want to put a shout out and thank you to all of their hard work for not only putting today's event together, but helping throughout the grant processes and the application processes. And then just a reminder that, you know, our purpose really is to improve broadband across the state and be, you know, a connection to all of you in making and achieving the goals. And so we stand by that, and we're very proud of that. In March, we did announce $50 million in grant awards to internet service providers across the state. And so I'm sure many of you may be working on those awards, but also recognizing that grant round 10 is currently open. And that grant round also has $50 million available, with $20 million in the low population and $30 million in the traditional border-to-border. I do want to flag that this application process window does close May 10th at 1:30 p.m. So just note the 1:30 p.m. closing deadline. And then round 2 of the line extension bids, accepted bids, are currently being finalized, and we'll be rolling them out very soon, as well as the next round of work for our next round of awards has already begun. We're also excited to share that our Digital Opportunity Plan was approved by NTIA at the end of March. That is available on our website, and I would encourage you to go and take a look at that, as well as we are working on our notice of funding for our capacity grants, and the award for Minnesota is a little over $12 million in the first round of University grants with NTIA. So working on that notice of funding deadline date as well. As far as BEAD goes, the Broadband Equity Access and Deployment Program, we're currently working with NTIA to cure Volume 1 and 2. And just note that the challenge process information will be coming soon. So we're working on that. We'll try to get out as much information as we can as we move into that phase of our BEAD planning. And finally, I just want to say, if you are not signed up for our bi-weekly email blasts or are not receiving them, we're really trying to make that a process that is every couple of weeks and has important information on what's happening with digital equity and opportunities, as well as our infrastructure program. So feel free to sign up for that. So with that, today's session, we will move into, and we're really thankful to have the Minnesota Indian Affairs Council here, the Minnesota Historical Society, as well as the Office of the State Archaeologist. Thank you again today for joining us, and to our partners that are here to help bring this meaningful training. We will be taking questions after the presentation, so please stay on, and Anna will be on to give you instructions on whether you put it in the chat or if you can unmic and just ask your questions. So she'll help facilitate that at the end for our team. So with that, I will turn it over to Melissa, Jennifer, and Amanda with their presentation.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Jennifer Rankin. I am with the Minnesota Historical Society. It's a pleasure to be with you today. We will be discussing Minnesota archaeology laws and licensing. With me today, I also have Melissa Serta from the Minnesota Indian Affairs Council and Amanda Grunhold from the Office of the State Archaeologist. Amanda and Melissa, you want to say hi?
Hello.
So
Hello,
let me pull up the screen here. It's like and it looks like I can't see it. Does that look good, Amanda and Melissa?
It's in presenter mode.
Okay, so we're good to go?
Mm-hmm. Well, it's showing the next slide and the notes.
Okay. Start here.
Although it might be in presenter mode because I'm tagged as one of the presenters. So maybe one of the other folks.
Yeah, Jennifer, oh, sorry to interrupt you, Amanda. Jennifer, when you do the presentation, if you hover your cursor over the taskbar, you'll have like a couple different screens, and one of them is going to show just the slide. So then you lose that next slide in some of the notes. So if you want to go back to sharing and start the presentation again, I think that should show up for you. Perfect. Yeah, and then if you kind of hover over your taskbar, a couple different windows should show up on the bottom where your presentation is.
Let's see if does that look like it's moving or no?
Try going a little further down on the screen. I saw it earlier. It'll be at the very, very bottom of your screen where like the orange PowerPoint logo is, so further down.
Oh, I don't know if I'm having the same. Amanda or Melissa, do you think you might be able to pull this up?
Yes.
How does that look? Good? Okay. All right. Do you want to start, Jen? You want me to start?
Yeah, I'll go ahead and get started. Give me a quick second. Okay, perfect.
Okay.
So as I mentioned before, we're going to be discussing Minnesota archaeology laws and licensing. For the next slide, Amanda. As I mentioned today, we have also Melissa and Amanda joining us here. The Minnesota Historical Society, the Minnesota Indian Affairs Council, and the Office of State Archaeologists all share responsibilities in several of the laws and licensing for the state. I'm going to start off by kind of just outlining what the role of the Minnesota Historical Society is. Next slide. So some information with my role at the Historical Society. I'm the Director of Archaeology for the Minnesota Historical Society. And that includes several responsibilities related to archaeological collections, archaeological work on non-federal public lands, especially with our historic sites network. We also administer grants through the Legacy program for the state of Minnesota, and several other responsibilities. Specific for this presentation today, Mandy, you want to go to the next slide? A few things I wanted to kind of just outline for this group. For Minnesota, we were established in 1849, one of the first cultural institutions, in the United States, and our role really focuses on historic preservation, education, tourism programs, and exhibits. For the archaeology department, we have several roles that are defined. We're going to talk quite a bit about these, but I just wanted to highlight them specifically in Minnesota 138. That includes the Historic Sites Act and also the Field Archaeology Act. Today, we're going to primarily cover the Field Archaeology Act. In a previous presentation done by our colleagues at the State Historic Preservation Office, they did cover the Historic Sites Act in a bit of detail. So I would highly recommend looking at those presentations. But for today, we're going to focus primarily on the Field Archaeology Act and then also the Private Cemeteries Act. In another role, and this one was also highlighted by our colleagues Kelly and Lucy in the presentation with SHPO about 2 weeks ago, is the Minnesota Historical Society also maintains the Preservation Specialist Directory for the list of archaeologists. This is a list that is not technically an endorsement. Archaeologists are able to add their firm and their contact information into the directory. Next slide, Amanda. And you can see kind of how you're able to find this and what this might look like. This record isn't, is made available, but in order for an archaeologist to update their information, they do have to update that information by contacting the preservation office at the Minnesota Historical Society. But if you're looking for an archaeologist, this is a great resource to kind of see folks that are doing work across the state. Next slide. Melissa?
Good morning, everybody. My name is Melissa Serna, and I am the Senior Cultural Resource Manager at the Minnesota Indian Affairs Council. So the role of MIAC, Cultural Resources, well, MIAC in general was established in 1963 as one of the first councils of its type in the U.S. We got our authority under the Minnesota Statute 39.22. We are a liaison between tribal nations in the state. Cultural resources specifically, we work under two state laws, 307.08, the Private Cemeteries Act, and 138.40, which is the Field Archaeology Act. We also manage and direct all work being done on at our repository and laboratory, and we comply with the Native American Graves Protection Act. So some of our responsibilities under the Private Cemeteries Act we do reviews and make recommendations on construction development plans across the state. We help mitigate and recover and facilitate burial disturbances and recoveries of American Indian burials in cemeteries. We also now do cemetery condition assessments for American Indian cemeteries.
Hello, I'm Amanda Grunhovd. I'm the state archaeologist. I'm going to apologize in advance. I have a cough and it kicks in whenever it feels like it. So if I have to cut out occasionally, I apologize. So the state archaeologist is established in the Field Archaeology Act, and also within the Field Archaeology Act, most of the state archaeologists' duties are legislated. So if you look at the act, there's actually a whole list of the duties of the state archaeologist. Some of them are listed here: promote research, approve qualifications for licensing, public outreach, continuing education, review proposed development plans. We also house the state's site files, archaeological site files, as well. We currently have over 21,000 recorded archaeological sites in the state. There we go. We also have in our office all sorts of reports, soil reports, research reports, and we have burial files. Those are only, folks are only allowed access to those on a need-to-know basis because they're highly sensitive. And currently we have, well, this number is actually a little old, but we have over 2,300 recorded burial sites. It's probably closer to 2,400 or 2,500 now. The OSA also runs the OSA portal, which is an online tool. It's a great tool for conducting research. It's not the be-all, end-all. If you have a project, you should, as far as the OSA goes, also come into our office, or at least call our office to see if we have any additional resources, such as reports or burial files that you should take a look at. But the OSA portal is a good place to start. It contains scans of our archaeological site files. To get access to the OSA portal, you go to the website, which I believe is coming up here, and there's a link that just says request full access. And within the portal, these are all the sites. You can click on it, and you can click on the site, and you pull up the site, the scan of the site file. But that information is not public data, and it is protected under statute. And so you need to be a qualified archaeologist with a need to know. And so what we'll ask for when you request access is your resume or your curriculum vitae, and you'll need to sign a user agreement. This information that's in the portal is, like I said, it's not public, so you need to not share it with other people. You can't give out your username and let other people do the research for you. That is specific to you, and so you need to be really careful with the information in there. It's just like our site files. We won't allow just anybody to walk in and go through our site files. It is privileged information. But it's a great online tool, so just be aware that it's there. We do also have a sort of less specific level of access for city county planners that gives information regarding how many sites are located within a quarter section, so that they can just look and see when they're in the planning phases of a project to see if their project could potentially impact an archaeological site. And then when they click on it, it'll tell them how many sites are there, and then they know that they should contact our office or the Indian Affairs Council. So the next part is getting into the Minnesota legislation pertaining to archaeology. So do you want me to start, Melissa, or you want to jump into it, or Jen?
Amanda, you can go ahead. I did add the link to the portal into the meeting chat.
Perfect, thank you. So the Field Archaeology Act is probably the biggest archaeology law in Minnesota statutes. The intent is to protect and preserve archaeological sites on non-federal public land. The Field Archaeology Act only applies on public land. It does not apply to private land. And the Field Archaeology Act, like I said, it establishes the state archaeologist, and it also prohibits unlicensed archaeology. So it establishes the licensing, the basic process, and who is involved. So it says that the OSA, or the state archaeologist, and NHS are the two entities that are involved in licensing. It also defines the penalties for conducting unlicensed archaeology on non-federal public land. So like if you go out and do a survey on county property, you're in violation of the Field Archaeology Act. Right here, 138.33. So the only person that's allowed to do unlicensed archaeology is the state archaeologist. Oh, it's a blank slide. Jen, do you want to cover these two because they involve the Historical Society? You're muted.
Very technically able today. So as far as the role for the Historical Society, we work with the State Archaeologist's Office to formulate and issue these provisions for the licensing. Typically the role is the Historical Society license applications come to us. The Office of the State Archaeologist approves license, and then the Minnesota Historical Society administers the license. And so we have a process that we share several of those responsibilities when it comes to review and issuing those license. Next slide. I think this kind of outlines kind of the process on the next slide. And kind of how the overlap happens. The first group to receive this would be the Office of State Archaeologist, and that's when they're approving. And then we work together to review the applications. And this also includes responsibilities that we share also with developing any sort of licensing forms or any conditions. And once a license comes through, and then we will issue the license.
So then the next really major statute that folks need to be aware of is the Minnesota's cemetery legislation, and this is where my act plays a large role. Melissa, go for it.
So So most of the work that we do at Cultural Resources at MIAC involves the Private Cemeteries Act. And so this act is one that protects human remains over 50 years. And it's outside of platted cemeteries, and it applies everywhere in Minnesota, and establishes a felony to disturb cemeteries. So usually the process involves when it is not American Indian ancestry, it goes to the state archaeologist. And then when it is American Indian ancestry, it comes to MIAC. And then there are cases where it is unknown, or the cemetery has both ancestries. Then MIAC and OSA will work together.
Stops advancing on me sometimes.
So MIAC doesn't really relate. I mean, the 307.08 does not really relate to licensing, but MIAC does have duties under it that does impact licensing, which include cemetery assessments, project reviews, and working in an American Indian cemetery, which include survey of any sort of field work, any sort of reviews that are in the vicinity or the area of potential effect for known or suspected cemeteries.
For example, do you want to do it?
Yeah. Go ahead. No, it's okay. You can go for it.
Okay. For example, it's a felony to knowingly disturb an American Indian human burial ground without the consent of MIAC. In the statute, it says that MIAC is the appropriate authority for American Indian cemetery and burial sites. So, and OSA and MNHS will not sign a license that potentially impacts an American Indian cemetery until the applicant has consulted with MIAC and received their approval for the proposed fieldwork. Because we're not going to say, yep, go ahead and go out there and do your field work and, commit a felony without talking to MIAC. So it's really important that before you apply for your license, you have initiated the process and ideally completed the consultation with MIAC regarding your proposed work within the cemetery site or an area where there's a suspected cemetery site. Because you don't want to go to jail.
So consultation with MIAC would include thoroughly doing background research to determine what the site and the project might impact, or whether any of other sites that are being impacted are cemetery related. If this project could impact American Indian cemetery sites, make sure, like Amanda said, to reach out to MIAC to consult. And early consultation is always advised. It always really ends up better when consultation is early.
Yeah, because consultation can take a while. I mean, it might seem straightforward, but often it can take a bit. As part of the licensing process on the license forms, so quick caveat, OSA and MNHS are in the process of revising the forms. The revised forms will hopefully be easier to fill out, clearer. We're adding more check boxes and kind of gathering some more information that will help folks understand the processes. And one of these things that we're asking about on the forms is related to cemetery sites. And so we ask specifically about the cemetery sites on the forms, whether there are any present, If they're non-American Indian, which would mean that they would come to my office, or American Indian, which would mean that they'd go to MIAC. If you've consulted with MIAC or not, if you've consulted with any of the TIPOs, and if you have consulted with MIAC under 30708, if that has been completed and come to a resolution, and then we ask MIAC to sign off on that, to say, yes, in fact, they have consulted and we have approved this work within the cemetery site. So that to remind the applicant, I do have to do this, and then to make sure that MIAC, that what is written in the license is in fact what MIAC has agreed is the appropriate work for that site. Do you have anything to add, Melissa, to that, or Jen? So that's the contact information for MIAC. Go ahead, Melissa.
Yeah, I'm so sorry. This is our MIAC Cultural Resources email, and this goes to all of to me and also my colleagues. So if you have any questions, please feel free to email us at this address.
So now that you know the laws and how to get approved to do archaeology in this great state of Minnesota, or how do you get approved to do archaeology in this great state? So Minnesota follows the Secretary of the Interior standards. We know that is currently under review. So, but we will continue with the current standards until we hear how they're changing. The current standards are graduate degree, year of experience in archaeology, 4 months in North America, supervised in North American archaeology. You can complete your work. You have to also have a year of supervisory experience. This is another thing that we are in the process of updating. Currently, okay, here's a little bit more information. When you apply at this time, you would send your resume, email your resume to this email address, and you'd have to demonstrate that you have these qualifications. A year of experience is 260 days, 4 months is 87 days. Just kind of gives you sort of what those equal in days. And this is the form that I currently fill out. So we have more detailed information on our website, and you can call our office. Bruce Coonan at our office is the person who really helps walk people through this process right now. But essentially, I go through your resume and we request that you put the number of days for each project, what your role was, were you principal investigator, and what did you do for that project? And then I go through your resume and try to pull out your experience and fill out this form to see if you meet the qualifications. We are updating this system too and coming up with a new form where essentially you do that work for me, where you say, I spent 42 days on this project as a supervisor, and you fill out the form and point to where it is on your resume. So you'll send your resume and the form filled out. So I just look and verify. We're just getting a lot more applicants into Minnesota. A lot of it is because of the broadband work. And it just takes a lot of time for me to try to extract this information from people's resumes. And you know your resume better than I do, so it will take you less time than it'll take me to go through these. So these new forms, when they come out, which hopefully will not be too long, there are a lot of tables that you can just fill out. We also will have checkboxes for things. So hopefully and when all of this comes out, the new qualifications forms, and we've got some other new forms coming out too. They will also be coming out with training and updated website and things like that. So there will be a lot of information that comes with these. And then once you're approved, you can apply for a license. But you don't always need a license. You don't need a license for all work in Minnesota. So, Jen, you want to talk for a while?
Yes, absolutely. So before we move on to when we need a license and when we don't, one of the things I just posted in the chat a link to information related with the Secretary of Interior qualifications. One thing to note that there's different qualifications for history, archaeology, architectural history, and in archaeology. One thing that we have seen in the past when it comes to folks looking to get their license for the first time is we sometimes will see some folks with a variety of different disciplines. One thing to note with the archaeology minimum professional qualifications is the graduate degree in archaeology and anthropology or a closely related field. Typically for programs across the United States, a lot of us or most of us have degrees in anthropology with a focus in archaeology or something similar. The one thing that we sometimes will see is folks trying to apply for a license with a degree maybe in geology or not necessarily the background in anthropology or archaeology. Amanda, did you want to speak a little bit more about that, about making sure what a qualified archaeologist would qualify for as far as approving for a license?
Yeah, you pretty much need to have a degree that has focused on archaeology. Geology, history, I mean, unless you have some pretty significant experience in school with coursework that focuses on archaeology, that would, make us think twice about that degree. It really needs to be archaeology centric. Anthropology, specializing in archaeology. It's pretty rare that a history degree or a geology degree is acceptable unless there's some really significant archaeology involved in that.
So next slide is, when do you need a license? Essentially, anytime, whenever you need to do archaeological fieldwork on non-federal public land, and that'll include county land, city land, state land, township land, and tax forfeit land, and more. Also includes anytime, so for example, and kind of speaking from the Minnesota Historical Society perspective, so if a project is crossing a historic site that the Minnesota Historical Society manages, that would be an area that would be necessary for a license. If a project crosses a state forest or a state park that is managed by the Department of Natural Resources, that would also require a license. In addition, we do have land that is managed by the federal government. In some of those cases, and the same for tribal land that might require additional permits. For example, there's a quick note here about federal land that may require an ARPA permit, and that's an Archaeological Resources Protection Act permit that might be required in addition to any other additional licensing. So, for example, if you're working in, say, St. Louis County, Lake County, and you have land that's, crossing along the North Shore that also crosses into the Superior National Forest, it's most likely that you might need, a license if it's on non-federal public land, like a DNR state park. You might need a license from the OSA and MHS, and you might also need a license from Superior National Forest. The other part here too is just always ask that question, when it may require additional permits. I know several of the tribal historic preservation offices may have their own permit system, and those communities might have a permit that's required. And it's always necessary to get landowner permission. For example, if there is a project crossing a property for the Minnesota Historical Society, we typically would like to see information about what type of project is coming in, so we have an opportunity to review. In addition, a lot of these land managers have additional resources that they're aware that may not be necessarily available on a resource like OSA, the portal that we were talking about earlier. And so it's pretty critical to reach out to those land managers, because they might be able to help guide the process if there is other known resources, or if there might be known cemeteries or burials related to those properties. Next slide. And here's just a slide just to cover, when a license is not needed. So if you're doing desktop activities, so if you're going to the Office of State Archaeologist, or if you're going to the State Historic Preservation Office, or you're coming to the Minnesota Historical Society to do background research or archival research, that's not necessary. If you're conducting oral histories or oral interviews with landowners, community members, that's not a license is not needed. If you're doing any sort of desktop examinations, for example, if you're jumping onto the University of Minnesota website to look at aerial photographs, or if you're accessing topos or any other information, that does not need a license is not needed to access those resources. It's usually whenever you're on the ground and about to walk into a property. In addition, we also mentioned that licensing is associated with non-federal public lands. You do not need a license on private lands in Minnesota. Amanda, anything else you wanted to add here?
Yeah, if you're going out to scope a project and you just want to get the lay of the land to help with the bid, you don't need a license to do that. Even if it's on public land and you're just driving the corridor to figure that out, that is not licensed. We have gotten a lot of questions about that, but yeah, that's not licensed. You're just scoping it. So.
Amanda, and if you are creating, or if you're doing a survey, a visual inspection, do you need a license?
Yes, if you have the project and you're doing a windshield survey to figure out what areas you're going to do additional testing, yes, you do need a license, because you're actually making a decision about the project areas. So if you're scoping a project, you don't need a license. You don't have the project yet. If you are out there, you have the project, then you do need a license. Then it's official, and you do need a license for that. essentially the difference is if you have the project, you need the license. If you don't have a project, you don't need a license. So we have a bunch of different types of licenses. These are the most common ones. So there's the phase one, which is survey, which is probably the most relevant to this audience. Phase two is when you're doing an evaluation, trying to figure out if something is eligible for the National Register. Phase three is when you're doing intensive excavation, trying to get as much information as you can from a site, or just trying to draw a lot of data from the site. A burial assessment is when you're working on a cemetery site. That takes all sorts of different forms. You're either going to be working really closely with the OSA or really closely with MIAC or really closely with both of us. And then there's monitoring, which also takes all sorts of different forms. Often monitoring is associated with cemetery sites. It's also often just associated with archaeological projects, also associated with construction. But those are the most common license types that we have. If you have questions about what kind of license you need, just ask. We'll help you figure it out.
Amanda, we have a question in the chat I think that is very relevant to this. Stephen Blondo asked, how about drones or geophysical work? Do you need a license for that? And I can take that, Amanda. Yes, you do need a license for any sort of remote sensing or geophysical work. We have been licensing that work for a few years now, and so if your project is gonna include any sort of aerial or terrestrial remote sensing techniques, yes, and typically, depending on kind of what the scope of the project is, typically that would be a phase one survey. If it's if you're looking at kind of an identification survey, but we have also seen these techniques used for phase two or phase three evaluations, depending on the scope of that work. And I think the same thing for underwater archaeology projects as well too. Correct, Amanda?
Yes. Yeah. And I'm glad you brought that up, Stephen. The new phase one forms, and we haven't gotten on to the phase two and three forms yet, but the new phase one forms actually do specifically ask about technologies that you might be using, and just a little bit more information about those. Just because, these technologies are becoming so common. So we're trying to kind of just draw out a little bit more information about what's being done as part of the project with that. So thanks for bringing that up. So currently, you find the license applications on the OSA website. Like I said, we're going through some changes. The OSA website is kind of a mess. Just needs to be updated. But currently, it's under professional archaeologists, manuals and licenses, and apply. I think you can get there a couple different ways. As part of the project with this update, we're cleaning this up, so this will change. Hopefully, definitely, it will be cleaner and easier to find. But the way you find it right now is through this. The new phase one survey forms, and like I've said, this is just a draft, but they hopefully will be will be easier to fill out just because they're more descriptive and they draw more fully they pull in Minnesota's standards from the handbook, which is also being updated, but it draws the handbook's standards onto the form so that people know when they're filling out the license what these standards are. We're also incorporating more checkboxes just to kind of make it easier when people are filling it out. So, you know, if you think if it's all egg field that you're surveying, you can just check surface survey, but it also says that, you know, remember you have to have greater than 25% surface visibility. It's like, oh, wait a minute, there's an area that is grassland, so I'm also going to be doing shovel testing because I have less than 25% surface visibility. And then, you know, also things like, yeah, it's going to be state owned, but wait a minute, who owns it? Oh, it's, you know, DNR. Because we want you to know who owns the land so you can make sure that you contact them. And then again, do you have landowner permission? Just to try to make sure that everybody's thinking through it and crossing their T's and dotting their I's so that nothing kind of slips through the cracks. Yeah, do you have anything to add to that?
And I'll also add, I think this is important too because it also helps us understand, the type of work and what land is being accessed for these projects. It allows us to help guide archaeologists on who to contact too. That way, so if there needs to be a contact for a project that is occurring, in a state park on the DNR managed land, then we're able to actually forward you that contact information. If that archaeologist or that company does not have that contact already, so it helps kind of facilitate kind of the communication and we hope kind of assist in streamlining some of the communications and correspondences that might have to happen whenever projects are ongoing, and hopefully this kind of helps establish other connections too as well for consultants and everybody involved. I know for example for DNR land there might be some questions also related to environmental species and T&E and so forth. So this kind of can help establish some contacts if those contacts haven't already been established previously.
So this was in a previous slide too, but good to restate it. This is where you submit all license related information, questions, anything relating to a license goes to this email address for the time being. And more information a lot of information will be coming out once things change. So Jen touched on this a little while ago, but the process once you submit your license is first it goes to me and I do the first run through. If I have any questions, it'll go back to the applicant for answers. Once I'm okay with it, I'll sign it. If it goes, or if there are any potential American Indian cemetery sites that could be impacted, it will go to Melissa at MIAC. Once she is satisfied, if she has any questions, then it will go back to the applicant. But once she is satisfied, she will sign it and it will go to Jen at MNHS. Same thing, if she has any questions. Once she signs it, it goes back to the OSA and it's finalized. And then from the OSA, it is returned to the applicant as the approved license. And now you get to do Minnesota archaeology. Another happy dance. Jen, you want to speak to this one? You're muted.
Of course I am. Of course I'm muted. So we also just had a question from actually two questions on the previous slide. Could you go back to the previous slide, Amanda? Actually, the slide before that. Let's go back to that. A few things here. One, a question we did just get is, what is the a license approval timeline? I think that really depends. Amanda, and Melissa, I can let you guys kind of talk about that. But one thing we notice a lot in with the applications is if additional information is needed. One thing, as with any applications, if not all the information is provided, that can kick back an application. I do see that as one of the things that we've seen a lot with broadband projects is making sure all the information is there, especially understanding what archaeological sites might be potentially impacted. So when somebody is, when we're reviewing applications that come in for like 203 miles of project, a linear project, then that does take a minute to review. But Amanda, did you want to talk about timelines?
So, in the past, the OSA's goal has been for me to have it signed within a week. That said, these really large projects take longer to review, and there's been a fairly steep learning curve for folks that haven't applied for licenses in the state before. I think that, once that learning curve kind of evens out, timelines will be shorter. I don't know if a week is sustainable anymore. Just because the number of license applications that we're getting now has increased significantly. But to get through the whole process, I'd say at least for OSA, for a phase 1, probably once the learning curve evens out, 10 days, a week to 10 days, hopefully. And then, especially for these big projects, most of them are going to be impacting cemetery sites, so they're going to go to MIAC. And then they're going to go to MNHS. One thing that we're also working on is a licensing system. So licenses are going to be submitted into ShareFile. And so you will be able to see, you'll actually be notified as the license is signed by each office. So you'll know where it's at in the process. So that will offer increased transparency. You'll know when OSA signs it, you'll know when MIAC signs it, you'll know when MNHS signs it. So, that'll be helpful, at least in knowing where things are at in the process. And it will also hopefully speed things up, just because it's not all going through email. That's going to be a bit of a learning curve for us, beginning to navigate that process. The OSA has done some testing, and we are getting familiar with the process, but MNHS and MIAC still have to be trained in on that. So that won't be out until later this summer. We were hoping to have it out this spring, but we didn't actually. Field work never stopped this year because it was such a mild winter. So things got delayed fairly significantly. But so I can only speak for OSA. So MIAC or Melissa and Jen?
The timeline for MIAC for signature review and signature is anywhere between 1 week to 2 weeks for MIAC.
And for by the time it gets to MHS, typically all the details are usually typically worked out. So if a license application has to get kicked back because it doesn't have enough information, or more information is needed, typically by the time I get it, that's already been worked out. So my timeline's a little bit quicker. It's usually just within a couple days. And yeah, as Amanda noted, we're still working through kind of an email process. So how applications come in is via email, and how they kind of enter that workflow between OSA, MIAC, and MHS is still email. We're really hoping to get this system up and running. That way, it can kind of help streamline this process much more efficiently in the future. Okay, Amanda, do you want to go to next slide, or if we want to see a dancing puffin again?
All right.
So, Amanda, do you want to take this one, and I'll talk a little bit about curation too, after you.
Sounds good.
Yeah.
So, all work done in the field has to meet the standards in Minnesota. We do understand that there are reasons to deviate sometimes from the standards, but if you're going to do that, talk to us, let us know, explain why. You're the professional, you're the one in the field, but you need to talk to us and tell us why. If you just do it and don't talk to us, we're not going to accept the work. We have to, we need to know. And it's best if you talk to us before you change the plan and deviate from the standards, because we might not agree. And then we'll just send you back out there. But like I said, we are working on a revised manual, or we will be revising the manual. We are revising the manual. But so for the time being, use the 2011 Anfinson standards. It is out of date. So also understand that. But it's what we have for now. And contact us if you have questions or want to use different methods.
And I'll also add we're seeing a lot more out of state archaeological contractors as well too. And just know that every other state has a process that's somewhat similar, or might be completely different than what Minnesota's process is. And that's important to remember for archaeological consultants, is to make sure they are reviewing kind of the state manual for Minnesota. I know from having several years in private industry, it's always nice and easy and quick to kind of copy methodologies between work plans related to certain states, but making sure that we're not seeing a work plan that was designed specifically for North Dakota or South Dakota for Minnesota. So making sure that archaeological consultants are taking that into consideration whenever they're developing the work plans that they're putting in the licensing process. And another key highlight I wanted to also mention about this, one that we've been working to update for here at MHS, is MHS has a role as a state repository for Minnesota, very similar to other states. So just as important as all the field work that is ongoing and all the shovel tests and surveys that are going, is the care of the data and the collections that come from those. So just as important as writing the reports is the curation or the collection's care. So at the conclusion of a project, the artifact collection and the data associated with that project does have to get archived, and making sure that consultants are following those procedures as well too, and properly caring for those objects or artifacts. MHS is not the only repository. There's a process for becoming an approved state repository that is managed by the Office of the State Archaeologist. But keeping in mind, and that's another part of the licensing, whenever an archaeologist applies for a license, they do have to identify that curation facility to ensure that there is the proper care. And so, making sure that's kind of built into the process, but also kind of factored into budgets as well too. If there is the identification of an archaeological site or any archaeological collections, and also just as importantly as is the data for that information.
Oops. So just some things to be aware of, sort of some highlights from standards in Minnesota. When you go out in the field, you have to survey all areas with moderate to high potential. Surface survey is only acceptable if there's greater than 25% surface visibility, and the transects need to be 5 to 15 meters apart, depending on how far you can see. Shovel testing is necessary if you are if surface visibility is less than 25%. The transects have to be 15 meters or less. Everything has to be screened through 1/4 inch hardware cloth. And shovel tests have to extend through or into pre-Holocene soils. So you have to get down to through the soils where people inhabited. You can't just go through the A horizon. You've got to get all the way through. In some places that's not that deep. In some places that's really deep. It's all laid out in the manual. Some places you need to do deep testing. Some places you might have to do a shovel test and then auger. But just take that into account. In Minnesota, you have to collect all the artifacts. You can't, document them in the field and call it good. Maintain accurate notes throughout. And as Jen was just saying, the artifacts need to be curated at a state-approved facility. Questions?
Yeah, great. Thank you all so much for all that information. Like Bree mentioned, and as your slide says here, we'll go ahead and move into questions. Attendees should be able to unmute if you'd like to ask it, or I can help monitor the chat and read them out loud. And also, just to confirm, thank you so much for sharing all of those links in the chat, Jen. I will make sure that they are posted alongside your presentation when it goes online, so that's available to everyone and easily accessible. But yes, moving into questions if anyone has them. I believe so. The first question is just a clarification on if the questions on geophysical work or drones need a license, and I believe it was answered yes, both of those need a license. Another question in the chat. When working on a project, what is going to alert you that you will need to go through this process?
The licensing process, I'm guessing. If you're working on public non-federal land. So, you need to know who the landowner is. I would guess you're not going to just go out onto somebody's land and start digging holes or anything. So if it's public, non-federal land, you need to get a license.
And I would just add to, just especially with linear projects when it can be, hundreds of miles, 50 miles. If there's, looking at kind of all the landowner, land management parcels, and trying to distinguish between, what might be non-federal public lands versus private lands versus even public federal lands as well too.
Mm-hmm. And one question that comes up a lot. Oh, I'm sorry, Melissa. Go ahead.
Oh, no, I was just going to say, also keep in mind that cemeteries, even though they're on private land, you'd also need to make sure that you go through the process there.
Yes, because 30708, the Private Cemeteries Act, applies on both public and private, whereas the Field Archaeology Act is only on public. If you're in a road right of way, that's going to be public land and you're going to need a license. There often are utilities there. So, just a safety thing, be sure to do a utilities locate before you go out there and start digging. Just hopefully everybody already does that, but just be aware.
Great. Another question in the chat, if it was already covered or not, but on road right-of-ways, and then it says MnDOT or township.
Road right-of-ways can be either MnDOT, township, county, city. MnDOT has a permitting process, so if it is MnDOT, there's going to have to be somebody who's going to be applying to MnDOT to have the permit to even put the line in. But all of those, it's going to be public. That road right of ways are public. So.
Another question in the chat. I'm just going to go ahead and read out loud here. In the past, there have been times when cultural survey reports have been submitted, and they're wondering about when to expect a response for those. Again, a question on kind of standard processes and timelines, and if there is a timeline when the project can move forward if comments are received.
So with the OSA, we are spectacularly understaffed. So we kind of spot check reports. We can't review every report we get, unfortunately, at this time. So you may or may not get comments back from us. Essentially, if you get comments back from us, it's because we spot checked you and there was a problem. If we spot checked you and there's not a problem, we're not going to respond. We can't do it. So that's the short of it.
Yeah, very similar to the OSA, MIAC have been understaffed. We do like similar practices. If there's nothing that we see that is going to impact a site, or everything that we have done a consultation on prior and have come to an agreement, there might not be a need to reach back out or to respond. So it's really varies on the project from my
And then follow up to that question in the chat now too, if there is a timeline that we know the report is clear and construction can start.
It's, if there are no cemetery sites, it's 30 days. If there are cemetery sites, it is 45. Correct? Right, Melissa? I'm remembering that right.
Yeah, 45. Yep, 45 days for cemeteries, and also for cemetery assessments, it's 90 days for a answer back. So.
Okay, I'm not seeing any other questions in the chat. I'll give folks a couple more seconds though. And in the chat, I'm just quickly going to post the registration for next week's presentation. And I will also go ahead and post a link to the OBD website where all of this recorded content will be going, including the presentation from today. And I'm going to share my screen real quick. So like I said, and first of all, just thank you so much to Melissa, Amanda, and Jen for your presentation today and all the wonderful information you provided. We do have our final presentation next week. It is going to be from the Department of Natural Resources on the utility license application and process. I will also just leave this information up on screen. If there are any questions, please do reach out. Thank you again to our presenters and thank you to the attendees for their engagement. With that, I'll go ahead and wrap up today's session and just say enjoy the rest of your Tuesday, everyone, and thank you all again.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.